So in the last year, it seems like Surly has launched a shock and awe campaign of sorts in terms of bicycle releases. Lots of bikes. And one of them, which I feel kind of got lost in the mix, was the Surly Pack Rat, a 650B front-loading bike with cantilevers in 2018. Find out what I like and dislike about it in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're into the supple life, gravel bikes, 650B bikes, bike touring, bike fishing, you have found your people, consider subscribing to the channel. So before I jump into the bike review, once again, this is a completely independent bike review. I'm not getting paid by Surly. Whether you buy a Pack Rat or not doesn't affect me financially. If you're wondering why I tend to review a lot of Surly bikes, a lot of QBP bikes, it's because they actually return my emails, unlike some other brands, no names mentioned. But if you appreciate these truly independent bike reviews that's not swayed either way by advertising dollars, consider supporting the channel financially. This is why it works. So out of the dozens of bikes Surly has released recently, I feel like the Pack Rat in some ways is probably the most enigmatic, confused, left behind bike. I don't see a lot of people talking about it. So in big broad strokes, the Pack Rat is kind of like a touring slash rando bike. Again, they're 4130 chromoly, steel fork, steel frame, lots of eyelets, and very interesting geometry. The bike ships with Perimoto tires, which I removed because I found them a little too narrow. Although they are plenty supple, I replaced them in pretty quick short order with some Panracer Gravel Kings in 650B by 50 millimeters. So this review is going to be not exactly a stock bike review because I did make some modifications. The bike weighs in at about 25 pounds, 26 pounds, depending on your pedal and saddle choice. And if you buy a complete bike, it does come with this 24-pack rack, which in some ways I think really is essential if you're gonna get this bike. But I'll get to that a little bit later. The wheels have Alex Adventurer 2 rims, which are tubeless compatible. I didn't have the time to set up tubeless because I didn't have the bike for that long, but note, that is an option. In terms of the controls, it uses the functional but not very sexy Shimano Tiagra. Works great for me. I really don't have any complaints. The brakes are Tektro CR720s, which are cantilever brakes. Love them or hate them. Some people love cantilever brakes. I, for one, am not a big fan, so if I were to buy this bike personally, I'd probably swap them out for some mini V-brakes or regular V-brakes and just use problem solvers so that it mates up well with the road shifters. For a lot of you, this is going to be a make it or break it point. Some people will only ride disc brakes now. I'm kind of on the fence. I think if you live in truly wet climates, like in Portland, I think it would make sense to maybe pass on this version and hope they come out with a disc brake version. So looking at the fork, it's got a nice lug crown and it's got eyelets. It's got eyelets for front rack and fenders. It's got mid-fork eyelets, and it's got the eyelets on the shoulders of the fork, which are specific to certain Surly racks like the 24-pack rack. Again, lots of eyelets in the middle of the frame for water bottles or whatever accessories you need to bolt down. The cranks are a double 48-34, so again, slightly lower gearing, and the rear cassette has a max cog of 34. So you get that 1-to-1 ratio, which I feel like is a minimum for touring, especially if you're carrying a bunch of stuff with you, or if you're using the bike like it's intended with a big front load. And did I mention the wheels are 650B, of course, so you can run those nice big supple compass tires or whatever tickles your fancy. So what's interesting about this bike is that the smaller sizes up to 50 centimeters are built around the 26-inch wheel with clearance up to 26/2, and the larger sizes will clear up to 650B by 48. So that's really it in terms of the components, nothing overly sexy. So let's talk about how it rides, which is, I think, probably the most interesting part about this whole bike. So I have to say, this is probably one of the more interesting riding bikes I've had a chance to review lately. In the rear, the chainstay length is 415, so super short actually, and given the shortness, you'd think that it would just be super zippy. And while it is quick, it wasn't as fast as I was expecting. I know if that's frame material or other aspects of the geometry, but even though it does have super short chainstays, it doesn't feel like a road bike in the rear. It feels quick, but not like super fast, if that makes sense. In terms of the front end, this is where it gets really interesting. I've been thinking about how to describe it. The steering in the front is pretty nimble without a load. Like, it's super easy to initiate a turn. In some ways, I feel like when you turn the handlebars, the rest of the bike takes a second for it to catch up with the turn you initiated. All this to say that it does take some getting used to riding the bike unloaded in particular. It shouldn't be a deal breaker. It shouldn't scare you off from trying it. You know, I've ridden lots of strange bikes, from the Brompton to front loading cargo bikes. So after a couple rides, you will adjust, but know that it is different. And it's different because the front geometry is tweaked specifically so it handles well with the front load. Some, traditional rando bikes will accomplish this with low trail design. In the case of Surly, they went with a really steep head angle. Controversial to traditionalists, but you should give it a try. Honestly, give it a try. Most of the riding I did with the bike was with the 24-pack rack, which adds about 2 pounds of weight and completely mellows out the front end. I took it on a couple rides, loaded it up with fishing gear, and took it on some rough roads, some paved roads. And it was really interesting to see how that front load affected the overall front end steering. Kind of normalized it, and in some ways really balanced the bike. The closest analogy I can think of is a Brompton. Unloaded, it's the front end's really quick and a little bit squirrely, but once you put the big touring bag on there, it feels nice and smooth. And that's exactly the feeling I got on the Surly Pack Rat. I feel like it truly is optimized to carry weight there. It felt like riding a normal bike, even though you had a big load. On my Salsa Via, which does not have this front loading specific geometry, I'll put my fishing gear all the time up there. And when I ride with it, it is doable, but I feel like I'm always on top of the front end because it's flopping around. It's hard to control into turns. And I feel like on the Via, I'm kind of aiming the front of the bike rather than steering it, if that makes sense. But when I take that same load and put it on the Surly Pack Rat, completely different experience. I feel like I'm steering the bike. It's quick, it's nimble, I can pick through rocks. The front wheel is not flopping over. There's not like this big feeling of mass and inertia just screwing up the front end of the bike. So in short, kudos to Surly for taking a risk, and I think they actually achieved what they set out to do, which is a front-loading bike that handles fun and is playful and is useful, and you can take it on rough roads and on light touring. So in terms of likes, I love that it is 650B. I can run those big, nice plush tires. I love that it's front-loading because that's how I tend to tour these days, and it's nice to have a bike that's truly optimized for that rather than trying to take that style of packing up your bike and putting it on a bike that wasn't designed for it. Yes, you can do it on other bikes, but the experience isn't going to be as good. So if you do like to tour with a front load bias, then the Surly Pack Rat might be for you. But there are a couple downsides, just like some kind of deal breakers for some people. The big one, like I mentioned, is that it does use cantilever brakes, although you can change those with better stopping V-brakes, in my opinion. Another downside is just kind of the general weight of the bike. Again, I know this is Surly, weight's not the biggest concern, but I'd love to see a design like this using a little bit nicer tubing, a little bit lighter tubing, more lively tubing. And I think that would be such an awesome bike. I've become a fan of the geometry and handling of the bike. I wish some of the executions and the materials could be better. I'd love to see a more premium version of this bike. The complete version of this bike, which does come with the front rack, retails MSRP, just looked on the internet, for about $1,300. I think it's comparable to something like the All City Space Horse. Probably not as nice aesthetically, but I think I actually prefer the handling of the Pack Rat better. Depending on how you like to load up your bike, you could go either way. I would actually lean towards the Pack Rat in that instance. I think it's actually awesome we have an option for a front-loading bike like this, just a general mass market bike. I hope they'll continue to evolve the geometry, evolve the Pack Rat, or another version of it comes out in the QBP family. Time will tell, but pretty unique. Yeah, so good job, Surly. If you guys have any other questions about the Pack Rat, leave those in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer them. And once again, if you like this review, if it helped you make a decision, or if you just appreciate kind of, that these reviews are honest and pretty transparent, consider supporting the channel financially. And until next time, keep the supple side down.